station you're from?
Calvary.
We had the morning guy was here.
Off at noon.
Judge, before the jury comes in.
Yes. Hold on.
Based on our prior discussions with defense counsel and with the court, the state is moving that the next witness, Dr. Richard Defranco, be called as the court's witness.
On behalf of the defense?
Your Honor, I was party to earlier conversations. I do not necessarily think it's necessary. I don't think that Dr. Defranco is aligned in the sense that the prosecutor may. But I also was privy to the court's argument, and I found it persuasive. So whatever the court deems appropriate, Your Honor.
My understanding from the information presented to the court by the parties is that Dr. Defranco has been prescribing and, in effect, treating the defendant at CAAA, and that at the request of defense counsel, he also wrote a letter regarding this, certain issues in the matter. And Mr. Thomas has indicated that he felt that there was some reluctance or hesitation in the doctor necessarily testifying in a manner that most state witnesses do, which is they come in and cooperate fully with the state. And you've indicated in pretrial that that has not necessarily been the situation. That's your...
Well, I have not attempted an in-depth interview of Dr. Defranco. He's present in the room right now as we speak. So if you want to delve into that, maybe we should ask him out here.
Well, my ruling to with the parties and what it is now is that he is aligned more closely with the defense by virtue of his treatment of the defendant for a condition that is at issue here, whether or not the defendant was impaired due to methadone that was prescribed by this doctor and administered where he works. So I would allow him to be called as a court witness, and each party may ask him leading questions, but it's not, there is a limit
I understand.
to what you may do. And you are calling him, and in fact, they may call him in their portion of the case, but the idea is to get information before the jury and not to utilize the doctor to make statements or take sides. It's a medical doctor.
I understand. That brings up a related issue that we've also had discussions on, the issue of physician-patient privilege, and the state's assertion that by virtue of state's 1464, the letter addressed to Attorney Sin, signed by Dr. Defranco concerning Mr. Gaspar, has been openly discussed in the media on multiple occasions by Attorney Sin. In fact, it was used at the time of the arraignment before Judge Mataya and spoken of in the public setting. The state makes the argument that this waives the physician-patient privilege as Attorney Sin is acting on behalf of his client, Mr. Gaspar.
I don't agree.
I find that it is waived since the letter was requested related to Mr. Gaspar's treatment and condition, and that was sent to the attorney and is also disseminated in part. But again, as I told the parties, it's not a complete license to bring up any topic that was referenced in the letter, but it has to be more probative than prejudicial to Mr. Gaspar.
Right, and I believe I understand where the court has drawn the line, and I intend to honor the line, but I do intend to develop the various criteria in the clinical setting that are pertinent to the situation at hand. I'm not going for dual positives that are in the history that we're aware of.
My understanding is that the letter or other records contain references that Mr. Gaspar may have relapsed in a couple weeks prior to this accident involving Velez, but I've told the parties that is not relevant. What's relevant is whether or not Mr. Gaspar was impaired at the time of this incident, and in that respect, an increased dosage in the days prior to this incident may have had some effect. You can inquire of the doctor whether he feels it did or didn't, or could or couldn't, based upon his expertise in this area of addiction and addiction treatment. Again, this is not a license to go back into Master Gaspar's history and bring up incidents that would unfairly prejudice him before the jury.
That's not my intent.
And if I could,
Yes.
This is more for the doctor's comfort, Your Honor. We have a problem as a defense with the state asking to go into my client's privileged medical history. We would respect the court's order if that is allowable, and we'll abide by that. With respect to the doctor's testimony, all we ask is that he answer the questions truthfully. We have no issue. If he's on the stand, he's going to have to answer. And whatever privilege we have is not something that we are going to attempt to not waive here. So, answer truthfully, it's all we can ask.
Thank you.
Not waive.
All rise for the jury. Court is in session. Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. When I was walking down the hall, I observed a group view. I did not know that there was a woman-only elevator. And you excluded one of your members, so I hope that wasn't intentional. We're going to continue with testimony now. A little bit cooler than it was earlier. If it gets too cold, let me know. We have to state.
Thank you, Judge. Pursuant to the court's ruling, the next witness is a court's witness, Dr. Richard Defranco.
Sir, if you approach, raise your right hand. Be sworn. Do you solemnly swear or affirm, subject to the penalties of perjury, that the testimony you're about to give here will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please be seated. Doctor, the chair won't move. You will have to move up toward the microphone.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
I will be asking you questions, as will Mr. Sin. If you don't understand anybody's questions or you think it's unfair or unclear, please tell us and we'll rephrase it. Is that agreeable?
Yes.
Okay. Would you state and spell your name, please?
Richard Defranco, D-E-F-R-A-N-C-O.
And you practice a profession, sir.
Yes.
What is it?
Addiction medicine.
Okay. Are you a licensed medical doctor in the state of Ohio?
Yes, I am.
Tell us a little bit about your education and training.
Well, I had a BS in chemistry at Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Then I went to the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry in Rochester, New York. After graduating there, I did an internship at Stanford University in Connecticut, and then 3 years back at University.
I'm sorry, at 3 years at?
And then 3 years back at University of Rochester for my OBGYN residency. And then I started practice in Erie, Pennsylvania in the summer of 1993.
Have you received any course of your educational training or clinical knowledge here in the Cleveland area?
Yes, About 2005, I did my addiction medicine fellowship at University Hospital, Case Western, with Dr. Perrin and Dr. Edelman and others.
Okay. Would that be Dr. Ted or Theodore Perrin?
Yes.
Okay. And is he a recognized expert in this field?
I would say yes.
And why do you say that?
Well, he gives many lectures. He's written articles. He trained me. He's has a big part in the training of addiction medicine doctors.
And he travels widely both as an expert witness and to lecture on the subject. Would you agree?
I would agree.
And that's national in scope.
Yes.
And before we get into some specifics of the drug question that we're here to talk about, you have had a physician-patient relationship with Joshua Gaspar, is that true?
That's correct.
And was that at Community Action Against Addiction, a methadone maintenance clinic program in the city of Cleveland, Ohio?
Yes, it is.
Roughly, when did Josh become your patient?
I don't have access to those records, so I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Can you approximate months or a year and a fraction or whatever the case may be?
I would have to guess.
Okay. You focus your practice currently on this single topic of methadone maintenance. Is that a fair statement?
No. I practice addiction medicine. We use other medications in addition to methadone.
Okay. Methadone as a opioid addiction maintenance program is legally sanctioned by the state of Ohio and the federal government. True?
Yes.
And so long as we're talking about a physician's prescription and physician's orders, a person undergoing methadone maintenance treatment can go about their daily business.
Yes.
But there are issues of tolerance in the medical sense. When someone becomes physiologically adapted to the dose of methadone, would that be correct?
Well, to be complete, there are issues of tolerance both before a patient with a substance use disorder takes methadone and afterwards. Prior to starting methadone treatment, patients have opiate tolerance due to other medications or drugs they may be taking.
Okay. In the setting of this topic, where we're talking about opioid addiction and then substitution, or in the medical language, conversion, you're taking them off whatever opioid they're self-administering, be it prescription pills or street-level heroin, whatever the case may be. You convert them physiologically over to tolerating the methadone that's being prescribed.
Well, in my view, it's someone has opiate tolerance, and then once they switch to methadone, they still have opiate tolerance. There's not much difference in the physical tolerance part of it, except that patients can be uncomfortable at lower doses until we're able to adjust their dose appropriately.
Let's talk a little bit about methadone itself as a drug. All right. What is methadone?
Methadone is an opiate receptor agonist, and it's characterized by a very long half-life. That means that it stays in the system for a long time. It takes a long time to build up, and when you stop taking methadone, it takes a long time to leave your system.
We sometimes hear the term analgesic or analgesic effect. Can you tell the layperson what that means?
Well, the methadone is an analgesic. It does help with pain, and in some settings that's true. Paradoxically, when people are on long-term chronic opiate use, they can actually have increases in pain. So it's opiates are very good for acute pain, for short-term use, but not so good for long-term chronic pain.
Methadone is a full mu agonist. Do you agree?
Yes.
Define what that means for the ladies and gentlemen in the jury.
Well, mu agonist, the mu opiate receptor is just one of the class of different opiate receptors. And so what it means that methadone is a full opiate agonist, it means that it stimulates the receptor fully. There are some opiates that only stimulate the receptor a little bit, and there are actually other drugs that can antagonize the receptor or block the receptor. But methadone stimulates the opiate receptor, the mu receptor.
Is it physically possible for a person to overdose and die from methadone ingestion alone?
Yes.
How would that happen?
Well, opiates do decrease the respiratory drive, and so if someone takes more methadone than their tolerance can handle, their breathing can slow down and stop, and they can asphyxiate.
Is that the same basic mechanism that someone who overdoses on street heroin experiences?
Yes.
And conversely, are there known and documented effects of the ingestion of methadone to the naive individual? And let's stop and define that term in the medical setting. A opiate naive individual, what does that mean?
Well, that means that someone's never taken opiates or never taken them chronically or often. So perhaps that could be someone that maybe had some Percocet after a C-section, or had a sprained ankle and had some Vicodin, but in general they're not used to taking the opiates. They're not accustomed to it.
So, and we already touched on this topic, so they have no tolerance to opiates.
They have a very low tolerance to opiates.
Okay. So in this beginning discussion of the opiate naive individual, what are the physical effects of, or what can be the physical effects that are felt by the individual when they first ingest or begin methadone?
Well, in my practice, we don't give methadone to opiate-naive patients. However, if there were one and took methadone, they would have the effects of opiates, which would be, depending on the dose, it could be some pain relief, it could be some euphoria, it could be some slowing respiratory rate.
And for the layperson, when we talk in the medical setting about euphoria, we're talking about the high that somebody gets when they take an opiate.
Yes.
So methadone can cause its own high.
Yes.
You said it can depress respiration.
Yes.
Can it also sedate?
Yes.
And what's the difference in your mind between depressed respiration and sedation?
Well, depressed respiration means slowing breathing, and in my mind, sedation means a decreased level of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system functioning, where you get sleepy and groggy and that kind of thing.
In the opiate naive individual, in the medical setting, there's the abbreviation CNS for central nervous system. What effects, we're talking about those effects in essence when we're talking about decreased respiration, sedation, things of that nature, right? Because that's affecting your autonomic nervous functions that you don't usually consciously control.
Yes.
Okay. And would it also affect heart rate?
Yes.
How?
Well, in someone who's never taken opiates can decrease the heart rate.
Let's talk about cognitive abilities. What effect, if any, can methadone have on, or does it cause cognitive impairment?
Again, it depends on the patient.
Okay.
And if we're talking about someone who is opiate naive and not used to taking opiates, it could affect cognition, but well, it could affect cognition.
In what ways?
Well, it may make you a little drowsy, but it should not make you confused or hallucinate. I don't think it would make you hallucinate or anything like that.
Can it impair higher order thought processes such as judgment?
I would say perhaps, yes.
Under what circumstances?
Well, again, it's hard to, I have to make clear that if you're talking about someone who's never used opiates, then it might make their judgment poor, yes.
Okay, I understand. I just need to set a baseline here before we evolve the discussion to where it needs to go.
Okay.
So I think that's the appropriate place to start is for someone who's naive to opiates. Okay. Can it have the effect of decreased physical reaction time to a stimulus?
No.
Why do you say that?
Well, there's a huge body of literature with alcohol and how it decreases your reaction time, and it's not safe to drive when you're drinking alcohol. There's also literature about opiates, and they found that there is no decrease. So if your doctor puts you on Percocet for your sprained ankle, you can still drive your car safely.
So now let's transition this conversation into a treatment setting and dose establishment for purposes of establishing a tolerance. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Can you describe or define what I just stated?
Well, so methadone is a very long-acting medication, as I mentioned. And typically, when I see patients, they have been taking short-acting opiates. So they may have to take the drug 3 or 4 times a day, and their experience is, they feel up, they feel withdrawal symptoms, they take the drug or the medication, they feel better, then they feel worse again. So their blood levels are very erratic. When we start methadone, we typically start at 30 milligrams or less, and then we see how the patient does for a week, and then perhaps increase their dose slowly every 5 to 7 days, and we increase by either 5 or 10 milligrams. So because it has such a long half-life, we have to give it time for the blood level to increase and to take effect and to see how the patient's going to feel on any specific dose.
So entry level in a program dose, entry level dose, you said was 30.
30 or less, yes.
Okay. And what's the generally accepted upper limit of dosing in a methadone maintenance program per day?
That's a more complex question. There is no upper dose because tolerance can go up, and I have taken care of patients from other clinics who have been on doses over 250 milligrams. And as long as they have the tolerance to take that dose, they do well. In my practice, I try to stay under about 120 to 140 milligrams. Most patients end up on about 80 to 120 milligrams. So
tolerance in part is determined by the person's physiological adaptation to exposure to the drug and how their biology then handles it, so to speak.
Yes.
And would you agree that that's unique to every individual?
Yes.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, different individuals may have different concentrations of opiate receptors in certain parts of their brain. They also have different liver enzyme systems. So some people will metabolize or break down methadone more quickly than others. And there can be quite a variation in that. The interesting thing is that if you have 2 patients, one one patient might be on 120 milligrams, another on 80, it's possible they could have the same blood concentration of methadone. Another way of saying that is you could have two patients on 100 milligrams and their blood concentration may be different.
We see on TV these commercials for genetic medicine nowadays that science has reached a point where in order to prescribe something, in some settings, it's appropriate to know whether there's a genetic predisposition that affects the treatment. So does that apply here? There's genetic variation of individuals and how they metabolize methadone?
Well, I don't know of a genetic test that's clinically available for that. I know that they did some work with antidepressants and they were trying to decide based on genetics which antidepressant might work best for a certain patient. I suppose that that's a possibility, but I don't know of any current clinical tests that we have.
Correct me if I'm wrong, did you say when you initiate a dose, you would want to observe it for 5 to 6 days for stability purposes?
When we're starting out, yes.
Okay. In your clinical management, when do you consider a person to be stabilized on a dose?
Well, in general, when they're comfortable and they're not having physical withdrawal symptoms 24 hours after their dose, and when they're not using other opiates.
Fidelity to the treatment plan and orders of the physician is an important component in this discussion, would you agree? By the patient.
Well, in terms of treatment of addiction, methadone is just a tool, and we know that methadone works better when it's combined with counseling and support group and work of that sort.
Would you agree or disagree with the statement that 5 successive days of treatment are necessary to first establish the dose and the tolerance, and then 3 successive days or administrations beyond the 5 before one can reach the conclusion as the medical provider that the person is tolerant and stable on the administered dose?
Well, I guess it depends on the patient and the patient's track record and history. Is this a patient that's just starting out their first day exposed to methadone, or is this a patient that's been on higher or lower doses? So it really depends. But in general, I think the statement is true that methadone tolerance, opiate tolerance, changes, in terms of weeks, not days. So.
Compliance during dose initiation. When we're talking about, for example, your example of 5 to 6 successive doses, if the person is not compliant in receiving each of those doses, what is the effect on the ability to conclude whether or not they're tolerating it?
Well, that's a judgment call, but if somebody misses 1 or 2 doses out of the 5, their blood levels probably wouldn't be that different. So I guess I would look at their physical signs of withdrawal, like pulse and blood pressure, and piloerection or goosebumps, and whether they're fidgety and uncomfortable and that sort of thing. Try to get a feeling for that, and try to get a feeling for how many days they've missed. If they've missed 1 or 2 days, that's probably different than missing 3 or 4.
Okay, and that's my next question. Where's the line, so to speak, where you have to restart the clock or the administration of that dose to reach a satisfactory known stabilization? If the person misses 2 days, you say that can be in the discretionary area.
Well, there's no magic about 2 or 3 days. I think the other thing is that a lot of patients, if we're talking about initiating someone on methadone, 30 milligrams is really not a lot of methadone for a patient. So quite often somebody will take 30 milligrams a day for 7 days in a row and take every single dose and still be quite sick. So sometimes you can, sometimes I can get a feel for, whether they're going to need a higher dose or not.
So someone can be under-medicated on methadone.
Certainly.
Okay, and their level of addiction, if they're under-medicated, they can still be having physiological effects of the addiction process that aren't being totally taken care of by the methadone.
But they can still have physical withdrawal from opiates that aren't being taken care of by the methadone. I think it's important to make a distinction between these physical withdrawal symptoms and addiction. Addiction is a very different thing that we're trying to treat.
Okay, well, thank you. So let's stick to the physical. What are the possible physical withdrawal symptoms that someone who has got a more severe addiction can experience on an under-medicated level of methadone?
Well, the same thing we've talked about, increased pulse and blood pressure, agitation, sweating, goosebumps, things like that.
The topics that I talked about earlier, let's say impaired cognition. Is that part of this situation of being under-medicated but going through the physiological effects of withdrawal?
I don't think so. Going through the physiologic effects of withdrawal on methadone, since you are on some methadone and you're not having full withdrawal, would probably be very similar to having the flu. A lot of the symptoms are the same. So if you're achy and feeling terrible, you can still pretty much cognate, but you might not feel so well.
Physiological uptake of a dose. Can you talk a little bit about that? And what we're talking about in the clinical setting of methadone management typically is a liquid oral administration of a dose that's drank or drunk.
Yes, in Ohio, according to state law, we use liquid methadone in Ohio. In some other states, they use liquid or tablets. So this is a liquid, and if a patient were to drink his dose of methadone, he may have a peak blood concentration about 1 to 2 hours later. Is that the kind of thing you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
But upon consuming the dose, how quickly does the body begin the graph of absorption where it's going to climb towards that peak? How fast does the ingested methadone begin to be processed by the body?
Well, I think that it begins to be processed immediately. It's going to start to diffuse through the stomach and small intestine into the bloodstream, but that process takes time. So I would say it would, all I really know is that the peak is around 1 to 2 hours. I'm not sure how fast or how high the slope is. I'm sure that's been studied.
But the point I'm trying to make here is that from the moment of ingestion, that process of absorption begins.
Yes.
And I think I have an exhibit on that subject. Doctor, I'm going to show you something. I don't know if you've seen this scholarly article before or not, but it's on the subject that we just addressed. Take a moment and review it, please, and I suppose turn your attention to page 2 in the graph there. I'm sorry, 1550.
Okay.
Educate the lay people on the jury. What is that you're holding?
So this is an article where they took, excuse me, 5 patients who were on methadone, gave them their dose of between 100 and 120 milligrams of methadone, and then measured their plasma levels at 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 24 hours, and then tried to determine how quickly the methadone plasma level went up after their dose.
Okay. Does it basically agree with the statement you just made that peak absorption occurs 1 to 2 hours after ingestion?
Well, the study is only looking at 5 individuals, but according to this, it seems that the peak is a little later, maybe 3 or 4 hours.
Okay. You agree that the graph shows the blood plasma level begin to rise at the 0, the vertical left line, so that's the point of ingestion. So it becomes detectable in the blood plasma immediately or shortly after ingestion?
Well, actually, in this study, these patients were on methadone already, so at time 0, their blood level was pretty significant.
Okay, but it still demonstrates a rise in the graph.
Not in all cases. For example, the first subject listed in 1 hour, his blood concentration went from 0.73 to 0.70. So that one fell. The next 2 went up. The 4th one fell, and the 5th one went up. So.
Okay. So that also speaks to the variability of physiology that you talked about a few minutes ago.
Right.
Okay. Methadone hydrochloride is the generic or the actual drug name that can then be branded under various other manufacturers' specific labeling, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So in the methadone clinic setting, when we talk about methadone, we're talking about the drug methadone hydrochloride, regardless of the brand name.
Yes.
And you said that Ohio, in the clinical setting, is a liquid administration state. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the clinic is open 7 days a week.
It was when I was there, yes.
Okay. So, for everyone's understanding, then, if you're in the program, in this program, are you required then to attend daily to receive your prescribed dose?
Until you earn take-home doses, yes.
And how does that come about?
Well, if we feel it's safe to give people take-home doses after a certain number of months, according to the state and federal regulations, we can allow them to take anywhere from 1 day a week to 6 days a week, or even 13 days every 2 weeks home.
May I approach it?
Yes.
I want to show you several photographs. They're 1443, 1444, 1445, and 1446. Tell me if you recognize what's depicted in each of those.
These all seem to be photographs of a bottle of methadone hydrochloride, similar to the ones that we sometimes use at the clinic.
Okay. And we've all received prescriptions where you get the box and there's that folded up piece of onion skin paper with all that tiny print that's tightly bundled and attached to the box. Is one of those on that big bottle there?
Yes, it is.
And in medicine or pharmacology, that's called the package insert, correct?
Yes.
What's described in the package insert?
Well, the characteristics of the drugs, the side effects, the clinical uses, some of the pharmacology. There's quite a bit in there. Yeah.
Okay. The intended therapeutic effect would be one topic, correct?
Yes.
In medicine or pharmacology, when we talk about a contraindication, are you familiar with that term?
Yes, I am.
Define it, please. What is a contraindication?
A contraindication may be a characteristic of the patient that would make whatever particular medication you're thinking of using have some deleterious effect. There's sometimes maybe medications we use that could be harmful, but we have to make judgments about risk and benefit. So if a medication, for example, if someone had a cancerous tumor, we might give them chemotherapy that would make them quite sick. However, our hope would be that the beneficial effect of helping their tumor regress would be greater than any harmful effects. So a contraindication, there's relative contraindications, which means that, well, if the patient has this or that characteristic, you might want to think about this harmful thing that could happen if you use this medication, and compare that to the benefits you expect from the treatment.
The package insert contains other areas of either cautions, notice of potential adverse effects, and then also warnings, does it not?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about each of those topics. What might they cover?
Well, basically they're discussing various degrees of contraindication.
So, notice of potential adverse effects would be what? On the subject of methadone.
You mean what would some of the adverse effects be? Perhaps constipation, lack of libido, problems with sexual functioning, problems with sleep.
Okay. So-called, what the layperson might call a side effect.
Yes.
Okay. What is a warning?
Well, a warning would be a more serious contraindication, I suppose you could call it.
Okay. And, let's get right to the point here. One of the obvious and typical ones would be do not attempt to operate machinery or operate a motor vehicle while on this drug. Is that a sometimes listed warning? In general terms, for any drug.
I imagine that warning exists, yes.
And then what is a black box warning?
A black box warning would indicate the most severe class of these contraindications.
Okay. And the purpose of making it a black box is to make it front and center to everybody's attention that this needs to be considered as a potential worst case event.
Yes.
I want to show you, if I may approach, Judge. States 1447. Can you take a moment and look at that, please?
Well, to be honest, with the state of my eyes, I'm not able to read much of this, but
Have you seen that type of thing before?
yes, I've seen this before.
What does it appear to be?
Oh, this appears to be the document that we were talking about, the folded up paper document on the side of the methadone bottle.
The package insert.
The package insert, yes.
And the title reads Methadone Hydrochloride. Would you agree?
It does, yes.
Okay, and right after, it goes into the technical details. It's methadone hydrochloride, oral concentrate, USP, 10 milligram per milliliter, dye-free, sugar-free, unflavored, and methadone hydrochloride, oral concentrate, USP, 10 milligrams per milliliter, parens cherry, closed parens, for oral use only, RX only. Would you agree that that's the title?
Probably, yes.
Okay. Immediately following the title is one of these black box warnings that we just discussed, is it not?
Yeah, I'm going to check. I'm not sure you can see that.
Yeah, I'm really having trouble. It's perhaps my bifocals. I'm sorry.
It's a great copy.
I'm believe we can enlarge it on the mondo, Judge.
Okay, you can't have to give me that.
All right, it's very difficult to read. It is legible because it's barely, so
Can we enlarge it on the mondo?
if you don't, you won't be able to testify.
That's what I intend to do.
Yeah.
And then if he needs to adjust his position, or we'll adjust it.
Move the mondo pass forward.
Yes, sir. Doctor, how's your vision from where you're sitting? And where you're pulling forward, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that, yes.
All right. Are you able to read the black box that I brought up on the mondo pad?
Yes.
Okay. Can you read it for me, please?
Deaths have been reported during initiation of methadone treatment for opioid dependence. In some cases,
Slow down, please.
drug interactions with other drugs, both licit and illicit, have been suspected. However, in other cases, deaths appear to have occurred due to the respiratory or cardiac effects of methadone and too rapid titration without appreciation for the accumulation of methadone over time. It is critical to understand the pharmacokinetics of methadone and to exercise vigilance during treatment, initiation, and dose titration, dosage, and administration. Patients must also be strongly cautioned against self-medication with CNS depressants during initiation of methadone treatment. Respiratory depression is the chief hazard associated with methadone hydrochloride administration. Methadone's peak respiratory depressant effect typically occur later and persist longer than its peak analgesic effects, particularly in the early dosing period. These characteristics can contribute to cases of iatrogenic overdose, particularly during treatment initiation and dose titration. Cases of QT interval prolongation and serious arrhythmia, torsades du pointes, have been observed during treatment with methadone. Most cases involve patients being treated for pain with large multiple daily doses of methadone, although cases have been reported in patients receiving doses commonly used for maintenance treatment of opiate addiction.
Okay. So, like, basically all drugs, when properly administered, methadone is a safe and effective treatment for opioid addiction and the management thereof. You would agree with that, right?
I would agree.
Okay. But again, there are inherent dangers based on the chemical class of what methadone is. It's an opioid, and it carries the same risks as any other opioid.
Yes.
And let's define some terms that may not be familiar to the layperson. Iatrogenic. What does that mean? When they use that phrase, iatrogenic overdose. Right here.
Iatrogenic means caused by treatment. So if you go into the hospital for a gallbladder removal, but you develop pneumonia, then that would be an iatrogenic pneumonia. You caught that in the hospital. So I guess it's treatment related.
Okay.
Disease or problem process.
So for purposes of our discussion, it's an overdose from the treatment itself.
That would be an iatrogenic overdose, yes.
Okay. Doesn't mean that you were unfaithful to the program and got something else in your system. This can happen just from methadone itself.
That's what it says.
Okay. Would you disagree?
suppose it's, I can't disagree, it could happen. Yes, somebody could overdose from methadone treatment.
I mean, it seems simple language, but treatment initiation, in this context that we're discussing, what does treatment initiation mean?
Well, treatment initiation would be when I see a patient and we decide that methadone is an appropriate tool to use and we start dosing methadone. That would be initiation, starting the methadone. Somebody hasn't taken it before or recently. And
titration or dose titration, which we're talking about right here, what does that mean?
so titration is the process of increasing or decreasing the dose over time and noting the clinical effects and see how it's working.
So, for example, my father had a blood clotting disorder, was placed on Coumadin. We all know, people that are generally aware of that, you have to go and get your blood tested on a regular basis to see if the Coumadin is at the therapeutic value, or if you're metabolically processing it and you're getting too thin and you could hemorrhage and die, right? Because Coumadin came from warfarin, which was a rat poison, and then they discovered that it was medically useful in the blood clot setting. You would agree with that?
I haven't reviewed the history of that, but it sounds plausible, yeah.
Okay. From your medical training, do you recall the medieval German father of toxicology, Paracelsus?
I've heard the name.
Okay. Have you heard the phrase that is associated with his teaching? The dose is the poison.
The dose is the poison. I don't think so.
Okay. It stands for the principle that, like we're discussing, in a therapeutic range, something can be beneficial. You take too much of something, even though it's intended to be therapeutic, it can have an adverse effect and become poisonous.
Yes. Oxygen can become poisonous at a high level.
We've seen people die on these water diets where they guzzle gallons of waters in one day, and water can kill you, right?
Yes.
So anything can become the poison, quote unquote.
Yes.
Are you familiar with any FDA literature on the subject of methadone?
Well, familiar with, probably not. I'm not sure.
As a practitioner in this field, would you receive FDA alerts to practitioners in methadone practice?
Yes.
Okay. Have you received those in the past?
Yes.
Okay. As you sit here right now, would you happen to recall one from November of 2006 from the FDA on the subject of methadone?
I don't recall that one.
Okay. If I were to show it to you, could you take a look at it and see if it refreshes your recollection?
I could.
Thank you. May I approach it?
Yes.
States 1551.
So this is an alert from November of 2006 about death, narcotic overdose, and serious cardiac arrhythmias.
Okay. On the subject of what drug?
Methadone.
Okay. Can you just read the first sentence or two as to what the subject, what they're actually warning about? Can you read it out loud?
FDA has reviewed reports of death and life-threatening adverse events such as respiratory depression and cardiac arrhythmias in patients receiving methadone. These adverse... Oh, too fast. I'm sorry. Excuse me. The FDA has reviewed reports of death and life-threatening adverse events such as respiratory depression and cardiac arrhythmias in patients receiving methadone. These adverse events are the possible result of unintentional methadone overdoses, drug interactions, and the methadone's cardiac toxicities, QT prolongation, and torsades, which are arrhythmias of the heart. The heart's not beating normally. Physicians prescribing methadone should be familiar with methadone's toxicities and pharmacologic properties. And it goes on.
I understand, but do you accept what's stated there as issued by the FDA as medical fact?
That there can sometimes be a prolongation of the QT interval, yes.
Okay.
And that patients, and there can be adverse events and respiratory depression, yes.
Okay. So, again, it's an update at that time, in 2006, to what science is saying about methadone administration.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, generally speaking, methadone came into medical use back in the 60s, during the 60s heroin wave, if you will, and it's been in the medical community for a substantial period of time, right?
Yes.
And there's a substantial body of literature, as you've already indicated, that's developed on the study of the effects and administration of methadone.
Yes.
Doctor, let's turn to the subject of the methadone patient and driving. Okay?
Yes.
How do you approach that subject? What are your concerns? What boundaries do you set? What's your management practice?
Well, my management practice is that patients on methadone maintenance therapy can drive just as well as patients not on methadone maintenance therapy.
All right. Is that true in all cases of somebody receiving methadone, including, let's say, non-compliant individuals?
Well,
My question is there a line here somewhere where it's not appropriate to be driving on methadone?
I suppose you could think of a scenario where it was, but so So yes, there could possibly be a scenario where it was unsafe to drive on methadone.
In what you're thinking of, tell us what you're thinking of. Where would that occur, or how would that occur?
Well, I don't really know. It's the patients that I'm used to are patients who have been using short-acting opiates in high doses quite often. So when we start them on 20 or 25 or 30 milligrams of methadone, it's not enough to make them intoxicated. In fact, it's not enough to make them totally comfortable. And we do titrate them slowly. So I don't think there's a point where most patients would have difficulty driving. There have been studies of patients on opiates and patients on methadone driving, and that literature is also 50 years old. And it's well documented that people on opiates drive automobiles safely.
Okay. Would you agree that there is, I mean, you attend, I assume, as a practicing professional, yearly continuing education classes in your field of practice to maintain your license?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
And for somebody who's never attended one of these, it could be a half a day, it could be a day-long seminar, it could be a week-long seminar with various presenters, right?
It could be. It could also be online or reading the literature and so forth. There's lots of different mechanisms.
Right. I mean, like with the Ohio Bar, we can go online and view some material and certify that we've reviewed it and studied it, and then we get the credit for having done so.
Yes.
Same as attending the seminar, right? Or we can watch the taped performance. Same thing in medicine?
That's correct. In addition, I'm certified by the American Board of Addiction Medicine, and we have something called the MOC, which is Maintenance of Certification. So every year, in addition to our hourly CME, continuing medical education activities, we have articles that we read and answer questions and that kind of thing. So,
and at these seminars, you're presented with the state of medicine or medical knowledge and whatever recent developments may have occurred since you last attended a seminar. Isn't that one of the usual objectives, an update?
that is sure.
Okay. And they don't just say, okay, we're just going to look at Ohio medicine. You could have people from across the United States or even indeed international presenters from Europe or somewhere to say, okay, we did a study on methadone and here's what we found.
That's true.
Okay, and have you had that professional, personal experience?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree or disagree with the following statement? Numerous European studies of long-term methadone maintenance patients have shown that appropriately administered methadone does not cause significant psychomotor or cognitive impairment when administered regularly and when the subject abstains from all other drugs.
That sounds true.
It's a positive statement of the benefits of a properly administered maintenance program, right? So you would agree with that statement?
Yes.
Doctor, is that your experience and feeling too?
Yes.
Is your experience consistent with that statement?
Yes, that it's safe. Yeah, it doesn't cause those problems you mentioned. Yes, that's my experience.
Would you agree or disagree with the following statement? However, in the majority of cases, patients did not exhibit stable abstinence from drug use and had an increased occurrence of simultaneous psychiatric/neurotic disorders or personality disturbances which, by themselves, could be a reason to doubt their driving ability.
Well, I don't know. I suppose somebody could have something else going on that would impair their driving ability. Is that what you're saying? Yes.
So that's what it's touching on.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm going to object. I'm not sure what we're reading from.
I can readily identify. You objected to the document, so
The law enforcement document?
it's 1552.
I'll look at it. Yeah.
a comfort break would be appropriate now. Ms. Knox took one without us, so.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief break, probably till 10 till. Keep in mind, don't discuss this case. No one will discuss the case with you. Don't form expressing opinion. And no independent investigation or media. And you do not have time to go down to the fourth floor.
Dr. Winslow, we're going to talk about my sugar addiction that I have going on this week.
Yes, it's terrible.
They have a meeting, they have a whole meeting for that, yeah.
I need one.
I have that too.
Cake at lunch, cheesecake at lunch. I'm not sure what's going on.
Makes you sleepy.
Randomly stopping at places, handles milkshakes and lying about it later. That's a bad sign.
Yeah.
Boy, I lied out to the park, I went to the handles.
Yes, sir.
I am looking at the document. You can inquire this witness whether he recognizes it.
I understand.
You,
I'm not going to use it in the same fashion as a medical.
it's not a learned treatment.
I understand that.
If you want someone to talk about some of the things that are mentioned in this
Fair enough.
article,
I get it. I'm ready to move past it.
bring in an extra witness.
That's fine.
I wouldn't expect.
I understand the distinction. I'm not quite there.
All right. I don't know who is aware of that study in Germany.
I'm sorry?
I don't know who is aware of that study in Germany.
Do you mind if we push this back a little bit?
No, not at all.
Okay. I'm afraid the message is
Still on the black box. Still on the black box. We're done with that.
They're hitting the corner.
That's okay. That's all I can see. Looks like it's pulled out there, too.
Excuse me.
Do I go to the store? Something, yeah. I've been there, yeah.
Do I know who? I don't think so.
Ready, then, Judge? All rise for the jury. Dr. Ryan. You ready, Judge?
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay. a lot with Judge Krebitz at Mentor with his red court. Nice guy.
Court is in session, please be seated.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Defranco, we left off on the subject of methadone, a patient in methadone treatment, and where it intersects with driving, okay, as a general topic. And I think we established the point that a person who's compliant can be safe to drive.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you agree?
Yes. We established that point.
And we saw from the black box warning on the subject of dose initiation and dose titration that you have to have a specific period before one can, the treatment provider, the physician, can conclude the person is stable on a new dose. We covered that subject, right?
Yes.
Okay. You also said that I think in your estimation it was 5 to 6 days of new dosing before you would look at whether stability has occurred.
Yes.
And we talked about how many misses a person can have in their treatment administration of methadone before it becomes problematic, right?
Yes.
You said there's no firm line, 1 or 2 days versus 3 or 4. It's a matter of discretion, I believe your answer was.
Yes.
Okay. As a medical provider in a methadone maintenance program, what are you personally aware of in terms of Ohio state law regarding impaired driving on opioids?
Well, I haven't reviewed the statutes, so I'm not familiar with those.
Okay. In the treatment setting, is it part of your thought process? Do you have a concern about somebody driving while on methadone?
There have been many studies to show that it's safe to drive on opiates, so I don't think that's part of my daily thought process now.
Would you agree that there are different levels of law in different jurisdictions? And, for example, in some states of the United States, they have a statute that says
Objection.
a certain level of methadone is prohibited, just like you would have for alcohol or marijuana.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that there have been studies with so-called low-dose methadone, and they have shown that doses of 80 milligrams or less are far less effective for treatment compared to doses of 80 milligrams to 120 milligrams. So, we do try to put patients on a therapeutic dose that's going to help them.
Are you aware of any studies that conclude that a person in a methadone maintenance program is per se unfit to drive?
I don't know of any, no.
May I approach, Judge?
Yes.
Doctor, I want to show you states 1553. Take a moment, review what it is, and then obviously the flag exists for the conclusion, and I'll focus my question after you've reviewed it on the last sentence in the conclusion paragraph.
This is from 1993.
Yes?
You haven't seen it before today?
No.
I'm not taking it up with this witness.
All right, thank you. May I have it back, please? Thank you. Doctor, what is the physician's desk reference?
Well, it's one of the least useful books about drugs that I know of. It's a collection of package inserts from various drug companies about their medications.
It's a drug encyclopedia of sorts.
Not really. It's a lot of legal documentation and lists of things that drug companies put in their package inserts.
Because the government makes them.
Perhaps.
And have you ever used the PDR?
Sure. Yes.
So you have found it to be useful on occasion.
Not especially.
Have you ever found it to be inaccurate?
Yes.
In what instances?
In instances where, well, it's like when you watch a commercial on TV for a medication, and then at the end they say, if you suffer, it can cause all these things. They list every symptom known to man. So a lot of times they have symptoms and problems that occur in less than 1% of the patient population. So it's very dense and hard to really extract what is meaningful clinically.
Okay. May I approach it?
Yes.
Doctor, I want to show you the 2017 edition of the PDR, and turn to the flagged page, which is in section S as in Sam-549, and direct your attention to methadone oral solution, here in the bottom right corner. Can you read that okay?
Yes.
Can you read the black box warning that's there in that reference? Out loud, please.
If this needs to be distributed, or if someone else would like to read it, I'd appreciate it. I don't see what purpose there would be for me to read these things. They're not my statements.
Well, they're pertinent, I feel, to your testimony, and I would ask the court to instruct the witness.
Should I read it?
Yes.
Okay. A methadone oral solution, methadone hydrochloride, class opioid analgesic, exposes patients and other users to the risk of opioid addiction, abuse, and misuse, leading to overdose and death. Assesses each patient's risk prior to prescribing. Assess each patient's risk prior to prescribing and monitor all patients regularly for the development of these behaviors conditions. Serious life-threatening or fatal respiratory depression may occur. Monitor for respiratory depression, especially during initiation or following a dose increase. Accidental ingestion, especially in children, can result in fatal overdose. Pardon me? QT interval prolongation and serious arrhythmia, Torsades du points, reported. Closely monitor for changes in cardiac rhythm during initiation and titration. Prolonged use during pregnancy can result in neonatal opioid withdrawal syndrome. Advise pregnant women of the risk and ensure availability of appropriate treatment. For detoxification and maintenance of opiate dependence, methadone should be administered in accordance with treatment standards, including limitations on unsupervised administration.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate that this is not pleasant to be on the witness stand in a matter such as this, but I appreciate your cooperation. Turning to the subject at hand, Mr. Gaspar, I want to show you a record, states 1461, if I may approach, Judge.
Yes.
Can you review this, please? Tell me if you know what that is or recognize it.
This is a report generated from the clinic, CAAA Methadone Clinic, for the dates from February 24, 2016 through September 29, 2016, indicating methadone dosing, and it includes the date and time that the dose was given, and also the nurse that administered the dose.
And who's the patient?
The patient is Joshua Gaspar.
Were you the treating physician for the time period in reference?
During that time, yes.
Just tell us the interrelationship of when a person comes in, let's say they're an established patient, what is the protocol, or how does the clinic work? I come in, I see the nurse. How often do I see the nurse? How often do I see you, the treating physician? How does that all work?
Okay, so sometimes the patient just comes in to get their dose of methadone, and they do that daily, at least for the first 6 months. And in that case, they come into the clinic and they wait in line, go to the dosing window, and they talk to the nurse and identify themselves by name and by their clinic ID number. And then they're given their dose, and the nurse talks to them afterwards. And during that time, the nurse is watching them and assessing them and seeing how they look. And that's all part of it. As far as how often do they see me and the nurse that I work with, they would see me for an initial visit, and then they would usually see me weekly until they're stabilized, and then less frequently, sometimes monthly to start with. But there are some patients that I would review every 3 months, but would maybe not see more frequently than once in a 6-month period if they've been there for a few years.
Okay. So in that scenario of the compliant patient, somebody who's attending regularly, they're on a good dose, they're stable, and they show regularly, you can extend your review period by your discretion.
Well, we do a 90-day review of all patients. When I started, we had about 350 patients, and after 4 years, or just short of 4 years there, we had almost 750. So we had a lot of patients, but there are government and state regulations that we have to review their dose every 90 days. So we had a mechanism, and I developed a flow chart so that each patient would have, every 90 days, there would be a document produced that would have their name, how many counseling appointments they've been to, their dose, what their urine results were, all that information, comments from the counselor, we would review those. And for patients who were struggling, we would meet and discuss them. So there was that 90-day process, but in addition, I would see them in the intervals that I stated.
Okay. Now, can there occur a circumstance where somebody does not appear as scheduled, falls out of compliance, that would trigger a sooner than 90-day review by you to find out what's going on with that patient?
Yes.
And how would you become aware of that?
Well, at the end of each day, there was a report generated that was patients who had not shown up for 2 days in a row or longer. And then, if there were a certain number of patients, we would talk about those and ask, does somebody know why? Were they out of town in the hospital or whatever? And if there was no explanation, we would investigate that.
Okay.
So we did keep track.
Obviously. And then let's say you summon you have the power, the ability to summon the patient in if they've missed, right?
Well, yes and no. Some patients are difficult to get a hold of, but if somebody missed for 3 or 4 days, we didn't know why, we would have usually the counselor first try to call them. If we couldn't get a hold of them, we would put a note in the computer for them to see the doctor before their next dose. So we had different ways we tried to get in touch with patients.
Turning to the exhibit in front of you, the dose record for Mr. Gaspar.
Yes.
Do you see what's indicated as to the I think it's the 10th and the 11th of September 2016 on the first page there?
Yes, I do.
And what does it indicate?
That he did not dose on September 10th, and he did not dose on September 11th.
And the record shows absent, correct?
Yes.
So where we see absent, it means the patient did not appear for dosing.
Yes.
Okay. So in this particular instance, were you aware of that when it occurred?
I don't recall.
Okay. Do you recall having any office visit or checkup with Mr. Gaspar after his 2 misses on the 10th and the 11th, but before this event? That brings us here on the 15th.
The date of the event was the 15th?
Correct. September 15, 2016 was the day of this fatality.
So you're asking me, if I understand this, did I see Mr. Gaspar during that 4-day interval?
Correct.
I don't know.
All right, I understand. You manage how many patients? Back then, how many?
Back then, it was close to 7, maybe 680.
I'm sorry?
About 680.
Okay. So how many patients would be in a daily caseload? If you're having a day full of appointments, how many could you see in a day?
Quite a few, up to 30, maybe 35.
Okay. Obviously, as we'll talk about, you became aware of what happened on September 15th, right? With Mr. Gaspar?
Yes, I did.
Okay. How and when did you become aware?
I became aware the day after when he came into my office.
All right. And how did he come into your office?
With officer escort.
Okay. And he was in custody, right?
Yes,
He was in handcuffs, right?
that's correct.
And why were they bringing him to you the day after this fatality?
That's a good question. It may have been because of the 2 days absent, or it may have been because he had a scheduled appointment. I'm not sure. They were presumably bringing him to the clinic to get his methadone dose.
I understand. The record before you, what's that exhibit number once again, please?
1461.
Okay. It trails off after what date? What's the last recorded dose administration?
September 17th, 2016.
And so he appeared on the 16th and the 17th, and then the record stops basically, right?
He was absent 2 days, and then he appeared on the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th. And then after that, it says absent for the remainder.
Okay. There's various columns like a spreadsheet on that exhibit. For the 15th, does it have a time of dosing recorded?
It does.
And what is the time of dosing administration on September 15th, 2016?
12:34 p.m.
And from your personal experience, do you know the computer clock that's on that record to be accurate?
You know, we did have disparities of a minute, a few minutes, but yes, in general, accurate, yes.
But no, not huge disparities.
Not hours, no.
Okay. So would you accept 12:34 on the 15th as the time he received his dose?
Most probably, yes.
So returning to my earlier question, we have absence on the 10th and the 11th. Then we have successive dosing, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th, right?
Yes.
Was there a dose increase during this relative time period for Mr. Gaspar? Was his dosing changed?
From what date to what date are you asking about, please?
Well, in this week that we're looking at, if the 15th, I believe, was a Thursday, let's just look at the preceding 7 days. Was there a dose change that you recall or are aware of?
Yes, there was.
And how do you know that?
Because I'm looking at the paper here.
Okay, what does it tell you?
His dose went up from 60 to 70 milligrams.
And how and why did that occur?
Because he had withdrawal symptoms, I imagine. I don't remember.
Did the increase occur before or after the 2 absences on the 10th and the 11th?
Well, the increase was probably ordered before the 2 absences, but the actual increase occurred on September 12th, the day after the 2 absences.
Okay. We've discussed dose initiation and dose titration and a period of monitoring following a new dose. Do you recall those subjects?
Yes.
Would you agree that on the first dose after the 2 absences, he's now at a new dose of 70? Previously, he was at 60.
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that this change in dose fits that situation of we need to monitor this change in dosing to see if he's going to tolerate it?
Well, there is such a thing as clinical judgment, and so while it doesn't meet the 5-day rule, some patients have withdrawal, and they do get dose increases that are safe.
Is it possible for a patient to just come to the window and say, you know what, you're giving me 60, nurse, and I don't feel comfortable, I don't feel well, I'm requesting an increase. And without seeing you, the physician, can the nurse increase the dose?
No.
So that can't happen.
No.
That shouldn't happen.
No.
What would happen if it did happen?
I don't know.
Would that be beyond the treatment plan?
The patients would see me for dose increases, and we would discuss it and adjust their dose.
Okay. Can you tell us whether or not which scenario occurred? How did this dose increase occur with Mr. Gaspar? Was it because he saw you and you adjusted his medication prescription, or because he requested it from the nurse and you were not involved? Can you tell us which happened?
Well, to answer that question, I would need to review the charts and things. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Obviously, this, I would hope you have not had a similar occurrence in your practice, such as this. You let the difference here, right? Have you had another fatality of one of your patients driving and killing someone?
No.
Okay. A significant, unique event in your professional life, I would assume?
That this is, yes.
Unpleasant, I understand that. Are you saying that you have no memory of looking at or reviewing Mr. Gaspar's treatment history in the days preceding this fatal accident?
That's correct.
If we were to obtain that record, would you be willing to review it and testify further?
Yes.
Okay. So returning to either the 16th or the 17th, which day was it that Josh is in front of you with law enforcement and handcuffs?
I believe it was the day after the accident.
Okay. Was there a discussion of Josh needing your assistance for what was expected to come in terms of the legal consequences of what had occurred on the 15th? Was a writing requested of you?
Well, you know, as a doctor, I often write letters or notes for patients, and it's fairly routine for other circumstances. For example, if someone has a hearing coming up with child services and they're trying to decide whether a child will be placed in foster care or not, things like that. So, as part of my job, I do write letters for patients. I don't know if I suggested that, but at some point, Josh did give me permission to speak with his attorney, and I said, you know, should I write some type of letter? And I wrote this letter.
Okay. And you signed the letter, right?
Yes.
What's the topic of the letter?
Well, the general topic was that methadone does not impair people when they drive an automobile. There were other things about Josh's condition in there.
Okay. May I approach it?
Yes.
Showing you states 14640. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, this is the letter that you spoke about.
And you wrote and signed that letter and addressed it to Attorney John Sick, correct?
Yes.
What's the date on the top of the letter?
September 19th, 2016.
Would you read it in full out loud for the jury?
Dear Attorney Sin, I'm writing to you about my patient and your client Joshua Gaspar. My understanding is that he was involved in a tragic traffic accident on Wednesday, September 14th, 2016. I'm writing to you to share some information about his medical care. Joshua Gaspar is currently on methadone 70 milligrams per day and has been on this dose for quite some time. It is well known that when patients are on a constant daily dose of methadone, their tolerance matches their dose and they function very well. Patients on methadone do not feel high and are not intoxicated. Patients on daily methadone do not experience withdrawal symptoms. Also, Mr. Gaspar's dose of 70 milligrams is a fairly moderate dose. I do have many patients who function quite well on 100 or more milligrams per day of methadone. In fact, the majority of my 700 methadone patients are on doses of more than 70 milligrams per day. Methadone is one of the most studied drugs and has been used in the United States since 1963. It is well known that patients maintained on methadone do not have decreased hand-eye coordination. In research studies involving driving skills, methadone did not impair driving. I did see Joshua Gaspar the day after this accident on Thursday, September 15th. He was understandably terribly upset. He was otherwise alert and oriented and appeared normal to me. He was not intoxicated. Of note, all patients on methadone maintenance therapy will have constricted pupils, as this is a normal side effect of all opiates. We did obtain a urine drug screen on Mr. Gaspar when I saw him on Thursday, September 15th at the CAAA methadone clinic, and this drug screen was negative for all drugs of abuse tested for. It was positive only for his therapeutic dose of methadone. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me. My cell phone number is sincerely Richard Defranco.
Thank you, Doctor. Can we agree that nowhere in that letter do you say the 70 milligrams was a new dosing level for Mr. Gaspar?
Well, he had been a methadone patient.
That's a yes or no, Doctor.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question is, can we agree that nowhere in your letter do you say, when you refer to the 70 milligram dose, nowhere do you say this is a new dose?
That's correct.
And nowhere in that letter do you say, oh, by the way, Josh missed his dosing on the 10th and the 11th.
It does not say that.
Would you agree that you wanted to help Josh in writing that letter?
Yes.
Okay. As a physician, you seek health and wellness for your patients.
Yes, in general.
Okay. So, I mean, in the healthcare professions, you're not out there to hurt people. You want to help them.
Yes.
And you have this investment in this area of practice, addiction treatment and management, which states and federal governments have recognized as valid and legitimate, right? And so that there's a public perception that methadone programs are legit and should continue.
I'm not too sure about the public perception. I think that there's also some prejudice out there too.
Okay. Yeah. But in the provider community, there's a bias in favor of the continuation of the program, right?
Sure.
Okay. Did you suffer employment consequences from the issuance of this letter?
Yes.
Tell us about those.
Objection, relevant.
Stay.
Were you in fact terminated by CAAA for writing that letter?
No.
Were you given a suspension?
Yes. Yes.
Who is
the administrator of CAAA at the time of September 2016?
Gladys Hall?
Okay. Did she write you a letter of reprimand for your issuance of the letter?
I believe so, yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes, sir.
No.
Okay, Judge.
How long on your exam, which you've already exceeded your allotted time?
May we approach?
You may, Mary.
Doctor, do you see Josh Gaspar here in court today?
Yes.
Can you point to him and describe what he's wearing?
Yes. He's wearing a suit and tie and a blue shirt.
Record will reflect identification of the defendant by this witness.
Judge, I'm ready to, at this point, conclude my direct with, based on the course of the exam, I would ask to reserve the right to recall based on that one topic that we touched on.
Do you have any questions?
Not for this witness, Your Honor.
So you may step down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are stopping here. I think early today. And if that has to happen, it's a great benefit to you because it's not 10 to 11. Right? So thank you for your attention today and over the past days. Keep in mind, don't discuss this case among yourselves or with anyone else. Don't let anyone talk about the case or discuss it in your presence. Don't want to express any opinion. We made some progress through the testimony, but we are not to the end yet. So keep in mind the cautions and prohibitions the court has given you. No independent investigation, no media, but you have a wonderful evening. If you're downstairs tomorrow morning at 9, I'm hoping we can get you up quicker. Thank you.
All rise.
Huh?